Good evening in this late session and long agenda, long day. I know that you are exhausted, but thank you for attending and staying with us in this session. And I expect it will be interesting, enriching, for something that might be described as a phenomenon, but right now it has taken a great deal of space in the Arab and international awareness at the level of the Gulf. In specific studies about the podcasts is saying that it is growing exponentially, and it started from entertainment, but it has turned into a process that is reshaping awareness and huge concepts in the Arab and Gulf community. There is a great deal of excitement and competitiveness among content creators that use these platforms for dialogue, discussion, entertainment as well. Some statistics say that there are 3 out of 10 people in the Arab region who listen to podcasts, and the Gulf region has the biggest share in that. Podcast market is expected to exceed $1 billion by 2030. The growth rate is over 20 to 23%. And there are conferences that are being held in the UAE. There was a conference on podcasts, and institutions, sponsoring institutions, have started looking at it as an industry and a market and not just an individual act. There are official platforms that started opening their own podcasts as well. All of this poses the questions: why podcast? Why is it so prevalent in the Gulf region compared to other regions in the Arab world? The relation with the political authority, the censorship, support, influencers, what is their role, the audience, and is this reshaping the public opinion, or is it just a reactive platform? So many questions that I will be asking today with my guests, and I expect that you know them quite well, but quite quickly. I have Mr. Abdullah Al-Khaldi, who has Sanad Qanuni podcast, and I believe he is the only one who has a specialized podcasts. Mr. Faisal Al-Aqal, بطون ورق podcast, and محمد الهنائي جلسة كرك podcast. They come from different areas in the Gulf. They each have their own experience, and each of them can enrich our insight of this world and in this industry. Perhaps we may begin with a traditional question, and that is quite expected. Why podcast? Why did you resort to it? And has and every one of you found the space that you were looking for in this platform, and why? Peace and God's mercy be upon you. First, I would like to thank those responsible for organizing this forum, for having me. I have the honor of being with an elite of podcasters. So, how did this idea of the podcast start? It started before 2019. I used to listen to so many podcasts, and during COVID, there was a huge influence and there was more time for people to listen. And my first episode was broadcasted in 2021. There are types of podcast. It might be a dialogue, it might be just one person speaking. And I looked into the podcast dialogue, and I saw how much freedom is given to the guest and they are not interrupted. We sit in together, one cannot finish their ideas because they are immediately interrupted. So I liked this idea, and I wanted for people to continue their ideas. I like the aspect of dialogue and the idea of a person presenting their idea, their thoughts, And this could be related to my specialization, which is law. I love my field, and I have a master's degree and PhD actually in my specialization, which is law. So I wanted to host legal experts, especially that law is directly connected or associated with the community. This is something that regulates the behavior of people in the community. And law professors say that one person that lives alone doesn't need law. So law regulates the relations amongst the individuals living in the same community. And so the issues that we are discussing and that we choose are always interesting. For example, in the beginning of the Gaza war, there was an episode that we recorded with a professor in international law, which is international public law vis-a-vis power or force. And I was attacking the international law and he was defending it. So some episodes and in some podcasts, I try to provoke people into thinking and reflecting. Oh, we will go back to this and the dialogue. And also, Mr. Faisal, why podcast? You say that you come from the idea of breaking away from traditional media, even though you are a producer yourself, so you want to break away from traditional media. Where did you start? Good evening, everyone. Thank you for inviting me. Every year, I'm invited to attend only. I never expected to be a panelist, and it's my honor to be here. Let me answer on the question of where the podcast began. We were a traditional media and artistic production company. We had texts, and accordingly, we would provide programs and shows. But we found that we had weak and general information. We wanted to read to strengthen our culture and reflect that in artistic production. And so we wanted to produce something called podcast. This was back in 2019. So via the podcast, we would sit with specialized people and disseminate this information to the audience. And so we would get this person and test our knowledge with the audience, and we need to be ready for that. We need to prepare ourselves for that. This was at the beginning, this was our biggest aspiration. Actually, we started with Dr. Ghanem al-Najjar, Ali al-Kandari, who is here, Dr. Hani Ibrahim, and also Butayna al-Isa. And the podcast grew slowly, and we hosted Dr. Haider Saeed, but we found ourselves competing without the intention of doing so. It was an organic idea. Breaking away from traditional media, when I sit with someone in the traditional way, we always get the same results. When I sit with you and I discuss something with you as per the certain or the usual rules, the outcomes are always the same. So, how can I today create a different ecosystem producing different outcomes? So, breaking away from traditions, not only for the sake of breaking away, but rather to create new outcomes. I will come back to the issue of traditional media and your relationship with it. Mr. Muhammad, you describe yourself as not a presenter, and you do not believe you are a presenter or an anchorman, but you work on a podcast and you say you are a visible library of the Omani situation. So there was a vision behind your podcast and you have goals. And so you are reformulating or reshaping awareness in some way. How did you start with this podcast? First, good evening and thank you to the Arab Center for inviting me. This is my second visit to Qatar. I've never seen anything actually in Qatar because I only see the hotel and the center. And the first visit was to film 5 episodes for a podcast. And There was not even a studio. We were shooting with the guests in their hotel rooms or in the lobby. So I'm so happy with this invitation and participating with this elite of speakers. And I'm so pleased that there are so many guests and we have guests that I shared with Faisal, like Dr. Abdullah. So جلسة كرك came not by chance, but actually I followed Western podcasts. I saw that there are people like Jordan Peterson, Elon Musk, they would speak for 3 to 4 hours and they have 10 or even 20 million views. So it means that there are people who would listen to this kind of content. And I was interested in intellectual and cultural content. So I said, why don't we study our content creation market? So I do not categorize myself as a podcaster or a presenter, but people label me as so because I make this content. So in the podcast, we are 2 or 3 people in the team. I make the production, I run the accounts, I publish reels, I moderate the dialogue, I receive them even at the airport. In other podcasts, there might be some companies and an entire team in charge of that. So we said we wanted to have a podcast that is close to people. We wanted to create a sphere of dialogue or a space for dialogue. And in a very short amount of time, we were able to distinguish ourselves in the Omani market because we are the first of visible podcast. Podcast had started in 2016, 2017, and they were viral in the Gulf specifically. But I started as a YouTuber, so I had skills that enabled me to deal with a camera. So after a while, I found out that the Omani audience and Saudi viewers, as well as listeners, are the biggest in podcasts in Saudi Arabia. You can see the second biggest audience after Saudi Arabia is Oman. So we found that the geographic boundaries of our audience, we found out that we have an audience of listeners. So 6 years later, we were shooting in 7 to 8 countries. We had dialogue with in no thresholds or limitations, and it was called Jalsat Karak. Some people are surprised by the name. Karak is the drink, well-known tea drink, and later on, people started associating or asking questions about the name of the podcast. They might, some people even say that the best karak you might try is the karak that you have in the prison, and I tried that actually. Perhaps we can come back to you in a few minutes to discuss this. Look, Mr. Faisal, you were talking about media just now, and you said that we try to have a different voice. Is the podcast the new radio right now? And on YouTube, visible podcast, is it a replacement for TV, or is it a complementary work, or is it related to generations? The previous generations watched TV and followed journalism, but now you are working in other spheres, other spaces. Do you see yourselves as a replacement for all of that? Let's differentiate between two things. There are the governmental traditional institutions and the private sector institutions. Private institutions, there are news channels and journals and newspapers. We are private sector. However, the administrative form is different, meaning that even in traditional private institutions running newspapers and channels, they have their own way of providing content and providing the anchorman and the presenter. So you start somewhere and then you get promoted until you are in front of the camera. In YouTube and what we're offering, we place a camera, record, and publish. And so I do not take that order and arrangement. This entails a risk because in our own way and style, we might not be providing content that is properly founded or is responsible when it comes to publication, because traditional channels have their own way via which one can verify information before they release it. And this is the strength of traditional institutions. But at the same time, and what we are trying to do is that we can introduce any idea that comes to mind because it's close to the street. For example, an episode with Ali Kandari about the history of invasion in traditional institutions will be in a certain format, but in our way, there are no certain steps in editing, and we don't need a third party who will dictate the way we provide or present our content. So nowadays, when we receive news, we receive them from for these formal institutions. So yes, we might learn from them on how to verify information, and they can learn from us on how to publish ideas quickly. So there is complementarity, and without competition, without competing necessarily. And so, based on that, this relation with institutions and formal media, you indicated strong dialogues between you and guests. So, do you believe that such platforms can do away with formal institutions? So, would it be sufficient, for example, in legal affairs, to listen to a podcast with a legal expert, or are you after spreading a certain kind of culture rather than replacing the legal institution? Surely, as a podcast, the main idea is enrichment and to benefit all parties involved. It will benefit lawyers, advisors, employees, and other people, employees. And so, this podcast enriches one's culture, and it's like a digital archive of the various topics and specialties. So, law can be one of these topics, especially that I have a book, Blue Book citation. It's like AVA, how to write margins on legal research. And when I wanted to look into resources, approved resources, they included podcasts. So podcasts are archives, especially if the guest is someone who is reliable and credible, and someone who is an expert who holds degrees and has scientific contributions. Of course, it will not replace the formal institutions who have more legal protection, but it enriches these institutions with information. I'll go back to you, Mr. Muhammad. When you indicated the audience, and you all talked about the audience, and we represent some sort of discourse. So, who is the audience? Are you targeting a certain kind of audience? When you are preparing for an episode or a kind of content, do you keep in mind that this discourse is directed towards this category and I'm trying to make some sort of change or impact? For a long time, we dealt with Jalsat Karak not as a project, but as an entity by itself. In the tone or the voice that we use, it was all about the identity of this podcast. So we had values, a matrix of values. The first value was awareness. Any guest that creates more awareness is welcome in Jalsat Karak. Also, influence. Any topic or episode that would create tangible effect on people's lives would be adopted by us, even if it poses a risk to us from making this episode. We would take the risk. And also, making money, and this is of course important, but we do not keep it as a priority, but we need that to continue with our podcast. At the beginning, I chose topics as per my own interests, intellectual and cultural interests, but with time we started keeping pace with the public scenes, specifically locally, issues of researchers, problems that take place. It depends on the issue itself. And then we started keeping pace with humane issues, philosophy, ideology, and we got to the point where we communicated with guests and we go to them for 4 to 5 days in Iraq, Kuwait, other countries, and then now we have guests who book their own tickets to come and shoot with a podcast episode with us. So, going back to the question, the public scene is formed by people's interests. And I noticed this is something that I've been noticing that. Human stories, humane stories, stories of success in top 10 episodes are with guests that have never been in front of a camera. This was something that was unexpected. It's the first appearance of them, a 2 hour episode. So, how could you attract audiences? But on the other hand, we receive audiences who are well known, but you don't, it doesn't go viral, perhaps because we didn't follow the same strategy as Faisal. Sometimes we get with a guest who has 10 appearances, but one appearance could be equivalent to 10 other appearances before. And this has happened before. So each episode has its own specificity. We targeted people, and we got to the point where many people, regular people, would tell their stories, incredibly inspiring stories. And so, for every episode has its own topic and circumstances and time. We do not have something certain here. So this gets us to the question, how do we measure this response? Is it about the number of viewers, interaction? Is there direct interaction from the audience? Does the audience change the nature of the episode and questions and even the mechanism sometimes? How can we build this interactive complementary relation, or taking into consideration the public opinion, for example? This is quite a loose word, and there are many orientations here. You're asking really difficult questions. To measure impact, people measure impact with number of views, but perhaps Dr. Ghanem Najjar is right here. We shot an episode with him. At the beginning, he was apprehensive. He was asking, "What is this podcast thing?" Because at the beginning nobody knew about that, and number of views were 15 to 20,000 views, but the influence here was on 20,000 people. The 20,000 people who saw the video are our targeted audience, and this is something that we cannot measure right now. We have more views even, but we cannot measure the impact with only the number of views, the quality of views. Until today, I'm looking for a way to measure the quality of this impact, and you can't even put a monetary value on these podcast episodes. Sometimes people measure the impact by the number of views. We measure it by impact when we see that the public discourse in think tanks is changing. I don't want to name an episode, but some episodes are presented, and 1 to 2 weeks later, other podcasts adopt the same ideas, and people start interacting with the podcast. And we can see that they're quoting things that were said for the first time on our podcast. So we can see that there is impact and that is sufficient for us. But to measure the impact directly, it's quite difficult because some episodes have 6 or 7 million views, but they do not create impact. They're just popcorn episodes. Some episodes have only 100 to 200,000, but they have much bigger impact. I cannot hear the speaker. He is kindly requested to use a microphone. Thank you. Apologies as the speaker cannot be heard without a microphone. I agree with you, and I believe this is what forms this case in dealing with these platforms. And measuring impacts is quite difficult, and the number of views is not necessarily the determinant here because sometimes it's purely entertainment and it has many views. And what my guests have in common here is their pursuit for impact, even if it's a specialized podcast or it's a general lifestyle podcast, it seeks to make impact. And so when you choose one guest and you are specialized as well or a specialist and you have a certain type of audience that listens to you, perhaps they're seeking legal advice or legal issues. So would this push you to expanding the domain of your podcast since you are seeking impact and spreading awareness? Do you believe that limiting yourself to law is sufficient? Yes, law intersects with so many other domains, and one episode that I recorded on custody, child custody, I hosted a Sharia professor, and of course, this intersects with medical errors as well and issues related to engineer work and contracts, FDI contracts related to engineers, for example, and intersectional studies, especially in the US, abroad, are more flourishing more compared to the Arab world. There are so many studies that have comparative data. We are trying to expand our topics. It's a challenge to find a good guest and then I convince them to appear on a podcast episode. This is one of the biggest challenges in Sanad Qanuni podcast. We struggle with that. And after they appear on the podcast, they're like, "Oh, this is easier than I imagined." So it's a big challenge to convince guests to participate. Threaten them with the law. So this interaction with the audience, and speaking about the audience, poses an important question. So this ability to go viral among audiences and impact them poses a question about the relationship with the authority and oversight and censorship. As you say, we are walking in a landmine. Why? In a field of landmines. I mentioned once in one of the topics that it's like you're walking in a field of landmines or a minefield. We recorded once an episode with a person who appeared in front of a camera for the first time, and he wanted to talk about to tell the story of his brother. His brother was a prisoner in the Kingdom of Saudi Arabia under the charges of smuggling drugs. But he believes that his brother is innocent, and the incident took place during the COVID-19 pandemic, and so there was just a nominal court hearing, and he was sentenced. And anyone who read the case file said that it didn't make any sense. So we did this interview, and during 1 week, over we had got over 1 million views on YouTube. There was wide, extensive interaction. We mentioned the security authorities in Oman and Saudi Arabia and leaders, but it was objective, balanced, ethical, and it did not raise doubts about anyone. We just said that this person is innocent and we need his case to be revisited. This was our top aspiration. 1 year later, this prisoner, because of the podcast episode, is now in Oman. So his case was revisited, he was extradited, and now he will go to trial again, even though he served 6 years in prison. But who would have imagined this power of a podcast episode? So, another example is about a person who told their story and he had problems. Within 1 week, his debts were paid by the audience using a charity institution. 100,000 US dollars were paid, and so many people had life changing events because of this podcast. And I believe that people who have problems with authorities have this problem due to the style and the way they made this episode. Sometimes they are sarcastic, they are too sharp in their style, but if you are respectable and you are objective, then you will not have any problems. And you will discover this with experience. And then you get the phone call. I know that this is a sensitive issue, but Mr. Faisal, you said that Al Diwaniyya or Al Majlis in Kuwait has its own role, but Al Diwaniyya is a limited space that ends by the end of the a meeting. But in podcasts, you are publishing episodes on an open space to thousands of people. So are you hesitant to discuss some issues in fear of censorship and the repercussions per se? We do not we're not trying to emulate the dialogue that takes place in Diwaniyya. Because Diwaniyas are only for men, I have a woman working with me. She is part and parcel of the podcast. Some people follow the style of a Diwaniya, but not me. Of course, we are proud of having Diwaniyas, but our dialogue is inclusive of the entire community. It's important for me to clarify that. So, how do we deal with sensitive political issues in Kuwait? We have a certain way that we've been using for 174 episodes. We didn't receive the phone call until now because in Kuwait we have discussed quite bold episodes, but we have a law for audio visual content. We have episodes that are political and some things that need to be verified. We usually send this episode to our attorney. He reviews it. He has 25 years experience in audio visual content, and he knows everything about the law. He helps us out with that. So when we discuss any idea, we discuss it, yes, but we need to realistic. If I am not able to present the idea with credibility and in the way that I believe is is free and clear, then I will not present it because I will not do it justice. So some things we do not discuss because it will entail legal repercussions. So we do not take that risk because we would rather make a difference, make change instead of having our impact disrupted and stopped. So, being there, persisting, and continuing our impact is more important than discussing one issue and then having our podcast completely stopped. This is our style and our way of dealing with this. I believe you may have less problems with El Sanad Al Qanuni, but of course, there are social taboos, ethnical taboos, so many things that you may not discuss. Does this create any sensitivities discussing legal issues? Of course, sometimes the authority is not just political, sometimes it's social, it's the community. So, with issues of law and its sensitivities, of course, there are topics that might create sensitivities, and I agree with Faisal. The issue of sustainability is the most important one. So, if you want to continue,
that you try in some loaded issues to avoid, it's better. And even with censorship, we don't have, with, since mid 90s, we do not have a Ministry of Information, so we have a margin for freedom. Of course, there are laws and, for example, cyber crime laws, but the podcasting is not regulated or organized. We have a big margin, but when it comes to societal issues, you should practice some sort of self censorship, and you have maybe legal advice sometimes. And Mr. Muhammad, even when it comes to sensitive social issues, and I noticed that people who have suffered from mental illness, people whose parentage is not established, do you find it difficult to deal with your guests? Do they ask for some sort of hiding their identity, or do they want to create the change they think is necessary? We are very flexible. We have guests who ask to appear and they didn't ask for any financial compensation. They said some want, for example, to have their case trending and going viral. And for example, I remember a person who used to prefer living with his father, and the rest of his family used to live with his mother. And when his father died, he went to the family, but the family did not accept him. He said to me, I want to appear on your podcast to publicize my my case. I said to him, why come to us? Why not go to the authorities? Uh, he said, I want to publicize my case. I said to him, but this can be a double-edged sword. It can go against you too. So I explained the situation to him. I said to him, we don't want to criticize anybody or attack anybody. We know this is a sensitive issue, and because of the legal aspects of it and parentage rights, etc. But because we decided that the outcome may be good, and I'll feel comfortable to take it on board. Mr. Faisal, a reverse question. Do you apply some censorship? Sometimes guests, when asked, they reply in the minimum way, but others surprise you with their frankness and I mean, do you accept the conversation or dialogue to be free without any notes, any text? Dr. Abdurrahman Ibrahim and Dr. Haider, this is a podcast. Our method is more or less academic. Maybe on the face of it, we do not use papers and notes, but we read. I mean, especially with academics, we read their research papers and things. And by and large, they do not surprise us. And if they do, there are ways of like indicating to them that they shouldn't get carried away. We try to deconstruct what he's saying because we also respect the time of the viewers and the followers. So if a person cannot answer or is wasting time, we either avoid inviting them from the start or we say to him after the episode is done that we don't consider this worthy of publishing and we ask them. But if the guest says something which is a surprise to us, we tell them. The idea that the hosts should know everything, this is not true, of course. I want to build my viewership and followers as a person who builds knowledge, acquires knowledge, and spreads knowledge, not someone who knows everything right from the start. Because if I don't know anything, I say, yes, I admit to that, but together we can find out more, and with time, people will understand that we seek knowledge and we study the knowledge the person has, and this way will avoid a lot of problems. Yes, definitely, there is no absolute knowledge, and everybody has his limitations. I may prepare an answer, but I get a different answer. Yes, we have a stigma that a podcaster or newscaster, if he or she says no, I mean, I don't find any problem in saying that I don't pretend I understand something when I don't. And I ask the guest to clarify things, explain things. Even if he repeats it more than once and I don't understand, that way I'll make sure I understand and the viewers would understand too. The followers would understand too. This will be better for all of us. The retention rate, for example, we had a simple retention rate, but the closer we get to our viewers, the higher retention rates become. So this is what we take into consideration. The idea that what broadcasters or podcasters say something which is absolute, it's not questionable, it's like cast in stone, is no longer there. These platforms now break these taboos and the unilateral way of presenting information. Mr. Podcast, your podcast is in sound only and it's different than Faisal. And how do you use the word trend? For example, do you say to yourself, I want trending and I'm not a media person. Some say that bad publicity is good publicity. No, we don't seek that. We seek impact to raise awareness, to enrich, and to create a legal archive, so to speak, that people can refer to. We want to provide the opportunity to people who are curious, who want to have, who are inquisitive, they want to know. Even papers, research, books, and things, the idea is generated that sometimes you find things you cannot find in written papers, and the ideas which are being presented, you see them with the passion attached to them, with the feelings. We do not seek trends, but we want a wider footprint, and this is a personal effort. At the beginning, I made a little research as to how to establish a podcast in 2021. I like this technical stuff, so I started assembling them and I used to publish them myself. That's why I didn't even have a special cameraman, but I got my information on Google Podcast. It's a humble effort. We recorded many episodes. We hosted legal personalities, some decision makers. Some of them took part in legislations and drafting legislations. And one of the persons who took part in the podcast had a role to play in the law on the guardianship of children and stuff like that. And these are all opinions, after all, and we try to engage in a kind of dialogue that can contribute. This leads me to another aspect, and that is the support. You say this is a personal effort. Faisal says it's a company. And what about you, Mr. Abdullah? What role do you attach to? I'm speaking from my own experience. We started as an initiative. I can't call it a project. Then the team expanded, but we did not become a company maybe 6 years later. And we did not rely on any source of funding because the trolls and because of some people consider the podcast as toxic. So how can someone call us toxic? And the Crown Prince awarded us with an award on the Day of Youth Achievements. We delved into different themes, political, religious, and then we realized that there are some things that the people do not like. So we relied on personal finance. Our cost really comes from the time we volunteer. Somebody said you're like a group of beggars. You get some money and distribute it amongst you. We gradually started getting some advertising contracts and we managed to improve our quality. We traveled more. We did more qualitative steps we reach far away audience. But like for example in Saudi Arabia where there are institutions which sponsor Kuwait, the sponsoring is better. We in Oman, the sponsors who want to pay for advertising, they do not come to podcasts, they go to celebrities instead. For this reason, we were not relying on sponsors. Some of my colleagues in the end gave up because there was no financial return. For me, this is an archive of audio stuff which reflects people's problems, aspirations, concerns. They're all kept in the same place, and I know a few people who are preparing their master's degrees and research, and they benefited from us. So this can be some sort of a legacy for the future. Maybe we can do some rebranding and we'll be more institutionalized. This requires a lot of time. I do not have time. This is just, this is like a side hustle for me. It's not my main breadwinner. Mr. Faisal, your situation is different. You are a company and you say this podcast, your podcast starts by saying this is sponsored by so and so. So, because you have the funding and the support, does this impact the direction you move in? Are you asked sometimes to deal with themes because you have to? This is a give and take situation between you and the sponsors. We started with 2 people, now our team is made up of 20 people. We started 6 years ago. I used to film I edit, and Neil I used to publish, so we're 2 people. And many people who knew us in the beginning remember us in those days. The first advertiser who came to us is a bottled water company, and they wanted to see this podcast, and they wanted the podcast to be a product. Some some look at podcasts as an amateur way, some look at it as a business and use it in this way. The podcast grew bigger and we started approaching people. I approached them once, but then we created the environment that attracted them. This is like any other business, you create the environment to attract customers and people who want to come and advertise with us. This is how we presented ourselves. And you mentioned sponsorship. We do not have sponsors in the sense of they sponsor us, but they invest in us. And the investors with us own the minority of the company. When an investor wants to invest with you, some come to finances. Some sponsors can come to you indirectly. Say, I give you a sponsorship, but in return, you host so and so person. But we do not want that because our content is the source of our credibility. So, is the investor coming to us because they want to control us, or we know they have a soft power and The ones who are similar to us in our thinking, we can give and take with them. We accept them, but we do not want just the money side of it. If we think we can engage in a strategic partnership with them, then we can deal with them. Sometimes people think this is negative when you get someone who wants to control your editorial line and themes. And this is not how we do it. You have to have the foundations to resist this agenda. You have the viewership, you have to have the money. Those who do not have this ability, they don't have this space to margin to maneuver. I to remain in this theme before we move to another question. Some say this is a hobby. I edit, I film. To what extent can a podcast continue without why your podcast was disconnected and came back again and is disconnected again and hopefully it will come back again. I think my case is similar to Mr. Muhammad's case. We do this as a side thing to what we do. And also, when you have other concerns and our time consuming jobs, maybe this impacts your chances of success. Of course, I have a team. I'm not saying we don't have them. There are things I don't understand in technical production, in direction. Some of them do it on voluntary basis. They do it out of their passion and their desire to serve the community. Of course, if we get some financial reward, this will be important and this can guarantee the sustainability of the project. We're trying anyway. We have a little bit of time. I'll ask, I know you're all tired, but a final question to all of you. Where are you vis-a-vis the international podcast? Do you see the Gulf podcast different than the international ones? Where do you see yourselves? Personally, I was inspired from Jalsat Karak, the Karak setting from an international podcast. And in 2018, 2019, there was not that amount of Arab podcasts, and you were forced to follow podcasts in English. But thankfully, in Gulf and Saudi Arabia and the UAE and Kuwait and Iraq and North Africa, there are more choices now. It seems there are important newspapers and media outlets who adopt this podcast. Personally, I do not follow the international ones, but all my concern is with Arab podcasts. I think the Arab podcasts and the Gulf ones used to impact the Arab countries. I don't know why, but the number of hits I see are higher. Uh, if I was to be asked before, I would say Egypt is the biggest country. But in Egypt, the following is very weak. I don't know why. I think there was an, an Egyptian guest who was hosted by Egyptian podcast, but we got more hits with him. I don't know why. As for the podcast's content, I think it has in Gulf countries to be the best because the most viewed episodes now are Gulf podcasts. Most of our content is religious, political, psychological, etc. We're still not able to produce podcasts which is of scientific nature, physics, chemistry, etc. In the West, they have more talent. People like Harvard, the professors and others, when they publish a book, they invite the author, and that way they have a wider footprint. If, for example, if this kind of center presents similar papers, but we do not have that. We lack in the infrastructure culturally because we are consumers by and large, we're not producers of knowledge. We have to understand this. This is a realistic view, unfortunately. No, this is the idea. We say what we have and what we lack. Why in the Gulf these podcasts are widely spread? Maybe this is due to the cultural, political infrastructure, the widespread technology. I agree with you. We need some quantitative statistics to know how Gulf societies have allowed this margin. Dr. Abdullah, I think that the international content compared to the Gulf in the Gulf podcast is no less in its importance and daily podcast. We see similar themes. Maybe sometimes they have a dialogue which is richer, as our podcasts are too. This is an optimistic way. I open the floor if you have any discussion. Dr. Zaid. Thank you, Dr. Maisa, and thank you to our guests. People by nature love to tell stories and talk. Podcasts offer stories. The Arab audience like to hear things more than read things. This is why they love these podcasts and these stories, especially what Mr. Faisal has said about history and other things, stories to do with the history and politics. The podcasts are not new. We offered them through the television and radio. I had two programs, one a TV program and one a radio program. And personally, if it wasn't for my personal efforts to put them on or publish them on video tube, and in Egypt they still are attached to talk shows, Ahmed Musa and others. But this is just an analysis I'm offering. We no longer have the same passion for television, but for example, well, in Saudi Arabia, there were interviews with pioneers, and now they are republished again, and they have a wide following. The difference that the episodes I had on television, Dr. Mesa speaks with like classical Arabic, and you speak with like colloquial Arabic. That's why you're accepted more because. But for example, I follow Mr. Faisal. I saw some episodes of Dr. Haider, and the episode by our Omani brother, I said, you said it was visually produced. Yeah. I ask you, is the language you use, is it destroyed? We remember the Grandizers episodes and classic Arabic. Now you present your podcast in your local colloquial language, and are you destroying the language or are you making it more popular? And also this kind of when when you want to, for example, there are financial fees or something. Do you want to write down the questions and then you can reply to them all? Thank you to our speakers, Abdullah Faisal Muhammad. This is the first time for Mr. Abdullah. I haven't heard about yours, but the podcast, which is without papers at Karak, I followed some episodes, so I have a question. It's, I'm sorry, the people present in this room is very small. We know Mr. Faisal doesn't wear the national attire. He wears casual clothes. My question is, you 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 said this is all about serious dialogue, but I don't see any challenging of any ideas, of any refutation. It's as if you hear a narrative and popular answers, which is very popular, nobody challenges them, you just repeat them. This is a problem. How can we use this kind of podcast to talk about controversial things, and also we know some famous celebrities, influencers. Do you try to invite them as experts, for example? Last question. You followed about Mr. Muhammad. You try to solve some problems, but there are some problems which are deeply rooted. Have you tried to deal with them to create some change in the way societies view these problems? Last question. I noticed that in Oman, and there are podcasts specific to the Far, not Oman in general. Uh, the- Good afternoon or good evening to you all. You usually receive guests. Today you are our guest, so please bear with us. The podcasts appear in at a time when in television we are told that the briefer you are, the better, the less time you spend, because the interviewer insists on very short interviews, 5, 7 minutes at most, and the podcast is totally different. We give you 7 hours, not 7 minutes, and with the same guest, same interviewer, with no breaks in between. I thought that only people with nothing much to do follow that, but apparently it's followed by the elite. I know someone who is very busy and he considers that he has to hear these podcasts. And you talked about, uh, apart from the society's authority, do you take that into account? For example, sponsorship. Sometimes, and sometimes it's when you need more followers, for example, you present to them that. Do you take into account the censorship of society so you don't raise certain issues? Dr. Haider, thank you very much, and thank you, Mr. Faisal, Mr. Muhammad, and Dr. Abdullah. I think this is an important session because we are contemplating podcast. We do not have many studies on that from a sociological point of view. What, like sometimes this comes as a surprise. Everybody tells you to be brief. Suddenly you see people, talking for hours. This is in the Gulf, so what does it mean for the region as a whole? I think maybe from the beginning, the 1990s, the Gulf led the Arab media with the establishment of the NBC, then Al Jazeera in 1996. Like Dr. Abdullah said, the Gulf became a de facto leader, maybe because they have the capabilities, and maybe when the satellite channels appeared. And I agree with what Dr. Zaid said, but let me develop the idea a little bit. Maybe this is part and parcel of this oral culture. Of maybe on the one hand is uh, the masses. Our media was always focusing on the elite, but now the masses are there. This is knowledge presented to the masses. So we really need to study why do people watch these podcasts. You can hear it on the way to work or on the way back. This hour you spend on the road, you do not, instead of listening to the radio, you listen to a podcast. And I discovered that it's replacing satellite channels, maybe 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock in the morning, rather than watching a certain program, you can use the YouTube. This is my personal experience, but this needs more research. They they are taking the place of the traditional media. And also the traditional media is based on an oral tradition. But I don't know when Al Jazeera will, for example, broadcast a certain program, but I can listen to it anytime. I think the importance is uh, how MBC and Al Jazeera established, but ultimately they're not widely spread amongst the Gulf audience. Here, the leaders of the podcast cover the themes that neither the official state-owned media tackled or the satellite channels. Maybe this vacuum was filled by the podcast. So we can ask a question: what gaps are the podcasts trying to fill now? Things to do with the expat community workers and things. That's, the gentleman there, and we come back. Good afternoon. A very busy day. Thank you. Thank you for the organizers, Dr. Mesa. My name is Abdullah Tai. I have a number of questions. First, the future of podcasts from your points of view. The moderator talked about statistics and things until 2023, but will it continue till 2033, or is it just a passing trend? So from your point of view, how do you evaluate this? I think now we have the reels on the Instagram. People do not want to watch long videos because this generation doesn't like that. Yet the same generation listens to a podcast of 4 hours, for example. So all these professors and things, people older than me, people younger than me, they all follow podcasts. The last point is pertains to, as we can see, the presenters or the hosts doesn't make much effort apart from sitting there and asking a question. So how can we discover the strength of this podcast? Is it through the hosts? Is it through the guests? Or the content? Or the strength of the production? Sometimes we hear that the the host does not argue, they do not challenge anything, they don't refute anything. They just ask a question and let the host say. For example, when Bidun Waraq invited Haidar Saeed, but it was not famous with another podcast as much as the first one. So why is that? Thank you, Kahlan al-Shuja'. My question to Mr. Faisal. My question to Mr. Faisal, when he said the Gull podcast is qualified to be competitive internationally, why is that? How does he explain that? And why is it attracting a bigger audience compared to other podcasts in the Arab world? This is on the one hand. On the other hand, is the social, economic, and cultural level of people in the Gulf has anything to do with the development of the industry of podcasts in these countries, and you as podcast makers, the viewers who follow you, I think in YouTube and other means, there is feedback. Do you find out that your viewers are mainly from Gulf countries or the Arab world in general? Maybe this way we can explain why the Gulf podcast is more developed. Just a quick comment. Thank you, first of all, for inviting our dear speakers. If there is any comment to make, in my estimation, the main reason why podcasts are so widely spread is the content is real. People see that and people listen to it. They spend hours, they have no problems. And this is not new. Before that, what Ammar Taqi presented in 30, 40 episodes, and people followed that because the content is real. And I follow what happens in Amman, in Qatar, anywhere. If the content is real and is presented in a good way. Also, another point, there are no fears of any censorship. The ceiling is very high. I can follow that these questions are my questions as a viewer or a follower, and the answers are credible and they are presented in a free way, so the podcast provides a comfortable place for the host to say what's said. Thank you. Thank you all. Now you are the guest. I give you space to respond, Mr. Muhammad. I took my notes. Generally speaking, we want to give the chance to everyone. Maybe what we all suffer from as podcast, what the doctor said is why you don't interrupt, challenge, or refute answers. Personally, I learned when when I was a guest, more of the radio stations, they ask a question before you continue, they interrupt. So for me, this was very annoying. I decided that when I invite a guest, I'll allow them the opportunity. And somebody did a study on that. The, the host spoke some maybe 10% of the time, not 5 years ago, people say, why don't you challenge the guest? Why don't you ask? Especially when it comes to religious, philosophical, or intellectual issues, they want you to be their voice. I think the audience should be the judge of that. With the passage of time, we do not see these comments, they disappeared completely. سوار شايف program. Why don't you challenge? Why don't you pressurize them? The podcast, no, we have a chat over a cup of tea or coffee, and you ask any guest who appeared on a podcast, they'll always say that the best thing about it is Sadiq Jawad, the late Sadiq Jawad, who was Oman's ambassador in Washington. Maybe he was 84 years of age when he said to me, son, when you ask me, he said to me, ask your question and keep silent because I don't have the ability to engage in this. Maybe I spoke for not more than 3%. It was one of the most successful episodes. We had millions of it. We're talking about the relationship between philosophy and religion. Then I asked him, what about this verse in the Quran? And people loved this show because you respected the guest, and this is the format of your podcast. This is very, I don't want to take too much of your time, and I hope I will not have to intervene, but the end of the day, I think, I just want half an hour of your time. No. If you follow me, you know what I mean. Have we destroyed the Arabic language? We have not destroyed it, but maybe we are. I don't know. Are we a cause of the situation why that the Arabic language people, some people see that it's being destroyed. We are not the cause of that, but we are part of the situation we find ourselves in. Maybe we are contributing to that. I don't know. Maybe you're right. So I want to be realistic. Am I responsible for that? No. I attended a private school. I studied outside Kuwait because our education system is defected. So if this was not our language in YouTube, and, and if we present thing anything for example, as you said, in classical Arabic, if we present everything we say, this may not reach a wider audience. It's true that the person who's listening to me, maybe his language ability is weak. When I get someone and give them free space to say what they like, of course I'll bear responsibility if the narrative is weak. This is true. What we do in our podcast when we talk about if we invite someone who comes to talk about the history of Iraq, we ask who can come and talk in a balanced way, who will take into account the points of view of different sides, then we invite them. Who can we want, for example, academics who enjoy a high degree of credibility. We pose simple questions. People know Iraq and Syria, but they do not know the real history of Iraq. I agree with you that we should not invite people just to get more audience. Like people like Ammar Taqi, they bring a person and they challenge their narrative. This is and the podcast is this is the we are presenting one type of it, and that is a chat show or a dialogue, and this is one type of podcast. And also, when somebody talked about the censorship, we had an episode on the rights of expat workers. It's a very sensitive issue, and well, you can do that in a very boring academic way or a way which is provocative, but you can also do it in an academic way. You present the facts, and so there are different styles. Last point, please. You have to you have to know how to deal with the logarithms, because marketing is half of what you do. The platform you publish on, you have to know how to you publish on. This the marketing aspect is very important. And the Arabic podcast, I said the most viewed podcast in is the Gulf podcast or Arabic podcast. So we want something to be lasting and sustainable. As for marketing, I know my shortcomings when it comes to marketing. As for the dialect in podcast and the use of language, I think spontaneity is a feature of podcasts, and this what gives a bigger impact and a larger footprint, because this is closer to people when the ideas are presented in a simpler way. As for challenging people's ideas, I think there is no contradiction in allowing person time to present his idea in its entirety and then ultimately challenge the same idea. Challenging the ideas does not necessarily mean that you interrupt them all the time. With all due respect, the way Ahmed Mansour that he provokes, and sometimes people cannot complete an idea because of the number of times he interrupts. And I remember the episode with His Excellency Sheikh Hamad bin Jassim, there was interruptions all the time. I can allow the person time to present his idea, then I can ask him. I say, you said so and so, but I charge him. There is no contradiction, but you don't have to interrupt all the time. Thank you very much. I hope that this is not, they're envious of us. This was a session about dialogue to understand what podcasts mean. If we say we live in the age of everything done in a quick way, so why is the same person who doesn't have time to watch anything more than a few minutes yet finds time to watch a podcast for hours? I remember my grandfather used to listen to Cairo radio and the songs of Kulthum. Maybe the age of a media with one voice, one complexion is over, and people have now uh, diversity of opinion, and the people have the freedom to choose. Is it to do with the ability of the host? Is it the voices of those who are marginalized? I don't know. There are many questions. Maybe we raise them here, but we will thank you for your patience. Thank you.